Yes.
You probably know more about it than anything.
You're like.
Okay, this is Senate Transportation. We're back from a break and we're going to be talking with Ross McDonald, the agency, and others about the public transit rated service model risk assessment.
Thank you,
Ross.
Thank you, Senator. I'm the Public Transit Program Manager at VTrans, and at some point we'll have the two principals from Cambridge Systematics joining us. They have a different schedule. I informed them to join us when they're able. Here you don't have a particular role in the presentation, but there is needed, as Steve Pavel was available earlier. But this assessment really stemmed from last year's testimony when we were talking about concerns, potential risks to the transit system over at large. This report will show the important component that the Medicaid non-emergency medical transportation service lends and contributes to the transit organizations. And in Cambridge Systematics, we'll have Baird Breen and Price Armstrong join us. So when you see their names come up.
Did you hire them? Did AOT hire them for several studies?
They
did the carbon reduction.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Cambridge Systematics is
contractor. Do you just several contractors?
This was separate, and Cambridge Systematics is part of the public transit retainer suite of contractors that have been pre-approved. And so when we look for a legislative study, we can send that out to the 4 or 5 of our retainers and get those competitive proposals. This committee was made up of Peter McNichol from Department of Vermont Health Access, Stephanie Barrett, the CFO at AHS, Jim Moulton, who's here today, and Elaine Hayco from the Vermont Public Transit Association, and myself, along with some of my staff members. So when we went the overview today, we'll look at a little bit of the project understanding background. Those will go by quickly. We'll quickly get into the findings, recommendations, and the discussion. Project understanding, you can see the language, section 16 on the left side. But we really wanted once and for all to better understand the way NEMT is.
Can you remind us of that contract?
Non-emergency medical transportation. It is under the Medicaid program.
Is there emergency medical? That's you're taking an ambulance.
Yeah.
Correct. That's exactly right.
And for most Medicaid, it's an entitlement.
The non-emergency medical.
Right, yeah. Because you can have coverage, but if you can't get to the doctor's office or whatever, then your coverage is not worth much. And this, if I
remember correctly, could be a trip down the block or to another state.
Could be like to Boston. Right. A lot of services, specialized services, children's require trips.
Wherever it's needed. If needed, long trips.
It could even be a flight. To be honest.
That has occurred. Eye care in Boston and Albany is not unusual. Certainly Dartmouth Hitchcock comes to mind. But we really wanted to take a look and work with our sister agency, Agency of Human Services and Department of Vermont Health Access to establish the benefits of their contract impacts to transit, see what the risks are, and just establish this baseline of understanding for our public transit providers, staff turnover, the legislature, those who are working on our respective programs, all under state administrative efforts.
Is it all Medicaid funded?
Well, the NEMT program is funded through Medicaid at a percentage. And so it would be either a 50-50 federal non-fed if it was a fee-for-service, or they have these brokerage models which allow us to increase that percentage. I believe it's 57 point, something. So that represents a big savings to the non-federal match. So we received our proposals and scored them and went with Cambridge Systematics. They produced a report here, which is looking at existing conditions, the risks and benefits of this current graded service model. They did program assessment and then recommendations.
Now, what else are you grading? Sorry if I'm jumping.
Sure.
Like,
No.
what are you just the Medicaid money and state money?
And the E&D.
So our older adults and persons with
Oh, I'm
disability
sorry,
program.
O&D
but-
now, I'll never,
Yeah, it took me 6 months, no question. And we have a recovery job access program.
And that money is state money?
That's another match. That's 80% federal, 20% match, non-state, generally coming from our partner organizations and whose clients we're serving. We expanded that program, the O&D demand response program, to have NEMT, and then our O&D program, recovery and job access.
How old do you have to be?
60 years old, the FTA
And
recommends.
so if somebody was doing the non-emergency medical transport, that's under 60, then
they're from
It's,
infants right up through that are on the Medicaid.
right.
Um,
Right, so that would just be that match. So can't grade those funds.
well, right, exactly. It's an unbraided funding approach to an extent. It's the braiding of the service primarily. And so we have the one call center and those types of efficiencies of scale. But
The state matches in your Medicaid appropriation.
but no question, the NEMT program is an entitlement, and it is federally funded but state administered. It was really interesting to learn through this report that there really weren't two exact similar models throughout the states. We have different populations, different needs, different modes that are available for these types of contracts. And we know that the Medicaid population continues to grow in terms of demand. The trips to the daily BART centers, not least of which, and the efficiency is important to maintain for the clients, as well as for our providers as they project out their budgets and capacities. So DEVA funds is the NEMT program. The Vermont Public Transit Association is the contracted broker, and they work with their providers. And then we come in and support the capital, the infrastructure, IT systems, so that we're able to allocate across the cost centers to maximize our respective investments.
What's the total dollar?
About $15 million for demand response service, and we'll show what that is as a percentage of our demand response throughout the state. And it's significant and the majority of our demand response trips. The background is that I'm sorry?
She could have written this report.
Oh, absolutely. We were
For
thanking
free.
the Senator Kitchell throughout. But these are shared resources on this braided service model. It really is allowing us to bring in the funds from NEMT and transit. There's other components to braided services as well. Some of our providers have contracts with schools and other services being the only mode of transportation in their regions. It's not just these two, but these are the overwhelming majority of funds used for demand response services. And we've always known and felt that the one call center is best for the customer service aspect, and that to have them speak to folks in the call center who are aware of all these different programs. If they are not eligible for a Medicaid trip, are they eligible under the O&D trip or the recovery and job access trip? What else? And so really that full regional coordinated resource, and that's managed across all programs. And we understand that can increase operational efficiency, putting more than one person on a vehicle at one time with two different revenue sources, using the same vehicles for whatever trips that the providers need to produce, reduce the per unit overhead costs, and that customer experience is no small item, as we learned through our interview sessions with other states. It was a national literature review, and in the last several years, we've seen a real effort to try to replicate a lot of what we're doing here in Vermont already.
And we've done it for over a quarter of a century. To
Another,
put it in historical perspective, this is not a new approach.
and it was at the time. The things have been so bifurcated for so long, where you had taxis and for-profit companies doing Medicaid, the transit working on transit, and in a city of 6 million or a state of several million with 88 counties, you know, that level of complexity made sense. But in Vermont, with our 640,000 people, the way that we support a robust transit service and include our own demand response service, and that infrastructure is already built, it made more sense, and it was potentially easier to conduct than some other states. And again, this is coming from some of those interviews that we had, where we're told, hey, we want to talk to you about what you're doing. Why are you calling us? But in addition, you know, even the CMS Medicaid Transportation Coverage Guide suggests working more with public transit entities and to better understand and serve the Medicaid population. And on the FTA side, Federal Transit Administration side, there's a coordinating council on access and mobility. These are the national discussions on how to braid systems together. I was just contacted by the GAO, Government Accountability Office, on how we are braiding these services and what we would recommend for federal rules as to helping these shared resources along. The volunteer driver program is called out continually through the report and in this presentation because it is unique, and it is one of the best parts of our unique demand response system. Whereas
Unique to Vermont or just unique?
It's unique to Vermont because of the level and the percentage that are provided to these programs, and it really is the backbone of our demand response services. And when I'm here, again, talking about the program, we'll talk about moving volunteer driver programs to the community driver program and looking at different ways to compensate where appropriate, to just try to build on those types of efforts as we see volunteer levels.
When you say the community bridge, so that's like the microtransit?
The community driver program is more like, if you'd like to be a volunteer, we would love to have you and provide the mileage reimbursement. If that doesn't work for you, would you consider an hourly rate to use your own car? Would you consider an hourly rate to use a fleet vehicle that the transit provider, and RCT is piloting that for us as well? And so we really, right now, we pay full transit rate, professional driver, many times ADA accessible vehicle, and then the volunteer driver. That's a big difference between 100 plus an hour and a 56.5 cents mile reimbursement. What is that middle ground, and how can we bend that cost curve down from that full transit rate capacity that we're utilizing?
Is there any looking at using those drivers to do the kind of microtransit, like the community rides kind of model that they're
Where you don't have to have a CDL and keep it under 16.
Right, but also just so if you're willing to volunteer, are you also willing to do some other group driving around and get paid for it maybe a little bit or something like that? Because if you're already doing it, instead of just getting a call every once in a while.
That's correct. Yes, we expect that because of the technology, to be able to provide a volunteer with a tablet and have that being rooted on those trips that don't require an ADA accessible vehicle, which is part of your registration or your client information. That would be a very important component of any mobility for all or expansion of demand response. As we just heard, we don't expect to have a lot of additional resources for additional funds, and so we have to look at doing more, different, and better with these types of structures. And the volunteer driver program is one that really needs to be enhanced and expanded. And through Mobility for All, other demand response trips, having these folks come on as hourly and then transitioning to a full-time driver and looking at and really allowing that to identify potential future transit drivers is no small item for us, as we want to fill the pipeline with interested candidates. But there's no question, our friends Price and Baird, I can see Baird has joined us, kept coming back to us and says, this really is a very good model, and it is comparing favorably when their staff were doing the literature reviews. So all the things that we suspected is now in a report to show and to share, and to all gain a level of baseline agreement and consensus.
Well, this historically discussion has been triggered when Medicaid has thought that there was a more cost-effective alternative to this. And so we have put language in, those who've been around here a while, that basically says if they were to consider this, then what would be the impact on the public transit infrastructure, et cetera, which is basically saying you can't meet the test, frankly. And so and of course Stephanie was here for years, so she understands how this has been set up. But I think the greatest concern has been if the Medicaid line of business should be pulled out and moved to a for-profit, what are those collateral impacts? And so I guess probably having a report that clearly articulates that is a benefit. But the argument here would certainly bolster the continuation of our current structure of bringing together the services and various funding streams. So, who asked for this? Did we?
This was a result of last year's conversation. Again, trying to identify the risks to the transit service. This was talked about, and this really did afford us an opportunity to come together with our partners at DEVA and Stephanie to instead of deal with the issues or the contract every few years, to take a step back and to identify their perspective and issues, our own.
Well, a lot of people wouldn't have any historical perspective in why this was set up. I mean, it's many years ago in terms of when it was, put in place. So sometimes that historical understanding is people don't have it because they weren't here 25 years ago.
New staff that we hire in transit at the provider level, new legislators. This is that baseline of the why and wherefore of this current braided system. And so the fee for service is that 50-50 split. Managed care organization, in larger areas, you can have a hospital provide a certain amount of NEMT trips. And then the brokerage model, which is the Vermont model. And you can see the states that we looked at and interviewed and did a deeper dive was Kentucky, Massachusetts, Michigan, and Minnesota. Those were states that were brought to us as good examples of doing things in a shared or braided system. And again, going through those discussions with them, there was a good example would be Minnesota, 88 counties, some braided service, but not a lot. They want to move to a model that is totally braided, and they told us that they would be in touch with us, but it's a little bit more complicated, and Twin Cities and the like. So the existing conditions are we do have those long trip distances that were discussed, super users who are regularly using the system. If the payment structure is a per member per week calculation, well, just having a few of those members use it so often can change that quite a bit. We have seen an uptick in no-shows, and the disruptive passengers, this civility issue that we seem to be having amongst our services, transit, demand response, is something that DEVA and VPJ have incorporated into their policies and trying to address those. Those challenges are the demand response challenges. Those are the transit challenges. And once again, showing the similarities more than the differences between our two programs. the driver shortages. We haven't built back the volunteer program that we had pre-COVID. We're around 300. We're about 165, 170 now. Medicaid regulations and entitlement structure is quite different than ours. If our O&D program is running over budget, we can constrain those a little bit to still meet budget, or look at our unspent, obligated unspent in other transit areas to move to that area. You don't have that level of flexibility with NEMT. And then certainly financial challenges, we'll talk about in a little bit.
So the long trips are, I assume it's both finance and like finding the drivers that can make the long trip.
Primarily finance. When we do have a few volunteers, those are the trips that many of them really enjoy and want, because the wheels are turning for more miles, and so more of a reimbursement. And that's what we've found in our urban areas. We have fewer volunteers because we're asking people to do 2, 4, 6 miles. And the RCT area, the Northeast Kingdom, we're averaging 60 miles in some days, and so we're getting more volunteers from that because it's just a little bit more meaningful to provide that assistance. But
On the other hand, that rural area, that volunteer works very, have a volunteer that's going to go to Newark Ridge. It's probably, if you can get a volunteer, it makes on that demand, because some of those areas are really quite a distance from anywhere to get to the medical service. I don't know, up in Essex County in particular.
I'm worried about, for this whole system, that we've probably maxed out the ridership, what I would call low-hanging fruit in the urban areas, and that your growth needs to come from into the rural areas, which is going to be cost unsustainable as far as with the revenue models that we're seeing. I don't see any easy path to expand ridership any more than what we have. I think it's going to get more costlier as you're pushing out into the outer areas to grow ridership. I don't know.
Well, for this particular population, though, it doesn't matter where they live. You've got to meet that federal requirement for
I
access.
guess I'm looking at the demographics of what we have is, as outlined in the address, as far as, what we've lost for population, 16,000 kids, 24,000 people between the ages of 45 and 65, and then population growth of 45 to 48% of people over 65. I don't know. It's I see a very tough road ahead here.
That would suggest that keeping these services in funding and maximizing all the available funding streams are really key to making sure that we're using every revenue most effectively. And I guess this is really what this report is demonstrating.
the recommendations do hit on that. If this works, then what more should we be doing together as state entities with clients and funding for transportation? Are there other programs for us to provide mobility services for? The success is certainly the braided service model. Receives general satisfaction from the operators. We can see the performance report with high numbers there. The shared administrative costs across programs. Some days we get 60% O&D calls, and sometimes 60% Medicaid. It just kind of allows us to blend those costs better. And that's coordination. And certainly AHS recognizes the benefits of those services and have provided those contracts to BPTA. We've every few years try to incorporate ourselves to some degree, suggestions on scope and requirements, scoring. And this is just contributing to potentially that perspective. So real existing, as you can see, the red bars are the Medicaid program compared to the O&D, ADA programs, and other. And so that's the school programs and the like that we talked about. I'm sorry?
What's the ADA?
ADA is American with Disabilities Act. In those areas that we don't have routes that deviate to serve, they would be qualified in a 3/4 mile area to receive comparable service as they would receive in
3/4
transit.
mile from the
Regular
transit.
That's correct. And the ridership through the modes, we can see volunteer, the dark blue. No other state is looking at those types of numbers, and every other state would love to replicate where we are. It's something we just really have to address. We've spoken with GMT and Clayton about, their efforts. We've put together a suite of materials for marketing through the Go Vermont contract, and we'll continue. This started last year.
Because it's declining, that's.
Because it's declining, and because if we want to do more and look at incorporating micro transit in our rural areas, that volunteer with a tablet is about the only way we can thread that needle at this point with the current funding approach.
Does it have to be volunteer, or is what you were saying earlier, like a small dollar per hour? Like, does that cause other problems? Like now you're having payrollers.
Well, it certainly can complicate things, but
Or could you just give them $1 a month?
You're still having to pay that person mileage, so.
Well, I wondered if you could just pay the mileage more, so then you don't have to do payroll or something.
Then that would increase the cost.
Well, I mean, yeah, I know.
Free volunteer.
Yeah, it would raise the cost, but it might allow you to have more drivers.
sure. So we can do a reimbursement up to the GSA rate. Anything over and above that, we'd have to find other revenues
yeah.
for. But absolutely, those are the types of approaches we're asking our providers to consider, understanding that that area between full transit rate and volunteer, there we really need to investigate that middle, and it's being done throughout the state. And we'll continue to look at those pilots. I'm going to go ahead and admit Price.
Is RCT the largest geographical service area? Because it now is Lamoille Valley, Lamoille County, so it's 4 counties.
It is.
So I was thinking it might be the largest in terms of geography.
Geography it is,
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when we looked at, okay, we want to quantify the exact impacts if NEMT goes away, we were told we might need more time, we might need more efforts, funds, because the variations are so wide and the different approaches are so many that to put a number on it would require a little bit more than what we had for this study in terms of resources and time. We had 4 months. What we did is take a look at the percentages of existing NEMT services, as well as interview and survey the providers. And we know that the revenue lost would be 56% of our statewide demand response service.
What happened?
If the NEMT program was to be moved from the VPTA brokerage model to a for-profit broker, or if the VPTA...
Somebody proposing?
Oh, it has been proposed several years ago. DEVA, looking at ways of trying to save money, actually put it out to bid, and there was great concern that, in fact, if they moved forward, what it would have for collateral impacts. That's when we put language in to basically put parameters around the conditions that would have to be met. And as you can see, what the impact would be, those were conditions that were impossible to meet to support a movement away and creating a separate system.
You save some
operating.
Medicaid dollars, but you lose all these dollars.
And in the end, I'm not sure it would have saved Medicaid. But there was this view that somehow other states had a more cost-effective model. And so there have been several attempts actually to upgrade this, unsuccessful, of course.
Okay.
Every few years, it does create some...
It's I'm sorry if I may, it's
Really
really
good way to be recognized.
Thank you. The senator's spot, she's been.
As always.
Yes, The senator and I have had the experience multiple times. DEVA frames it as CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services federally, requires the state to go out to bid for the NEMT services. Every time that happens, it literally creates a crisis because of the risk of unbraiding, which is what this study is about. The senator completely understands it from all of her experiences, and she hit upon it in the earlier presentation when she said, if Medicaid isn't in there, there's a whole lot of money that supports the infrastructure. Effectively, as far as this committee would go, if you're thinking just transit, if Medicaid gets unbraided, the cost of services for public transportation go up. Right. And as the senator points out, I would agree, it's not going to save Medicaid money in the end. It might for a year, it might for 2, but at that point, it's going to end up going up.
So what you made one place, you offset by.
If we were to look at sort of the state as a whole, it's more cost effective to have these braided. If you want to look at NEMT in narrow, in solo, then it might save the money, but it's cost shifting. It's a different type of cost shifting. Okay. I'm sorry for jumping in, but it's something that I've been seriously passionate about because if it gets unbraided, we are really SOL.
And those alternative approaches of a for-profit broker, we use a not-for-profit broker that is part of VPTA now. Right away, we see if they were to use those same modes without our robust volunteer program, we don't see how it could save money. And of course, we have to think about the client. That one-click, one-call resource to speak to folks about their programs is valuable, no question. And certainly, as we allocate, we have cost allocation plans that we approve every year for public transit. We can see the percentages of our capital program that go to support these programs and are charged to NEMT, overheads, their call centers, all of that would be lost. And that is why every few years we do have this clarion call for some understanding of those impacts. And here we are, and this is something we can continue to address. The recommendations we're going to go through right now, it starts with maintaining and improving the braided NEMT service model. They're to consider adjusting 3 areas, a little bit, but nothing major in terms of program structure and coordination, reimbursement, cost management, service capacity. These recommendations have a short, medium, or long time frame assigned to them. So this is a few pages long, but start by using the Public Transit Advisory Council, which Senator Kitchell has been on for years, to help improve the capacity for coordination across social service providers and to improve the capacity to seek innovative funding opportunities. We use the funding opportunity for the Recovery and Job Access Program. We proved its value, and now we have an MOU where we share the non-federal cost with AHS. What more can we do together? Right now, that Public Transit Advisory Council includes representatives from Division of Aging and Independent Living, Vermont Department of Health, but to expand that for REACHA, to seat somebody from DEVA and really look at public transit as public transportation or public mobility advisory council may be the next step for that entity rather than arrive at a different council with different but similar goals. Expand and maintain mobility management program. We invest now in mobility management, have provided funds to VPTA to hire a mobility manager. We know that can reduce funds and help reduce trip costs as well as help bundle trips too, to try to get more people on our vehicles. We want to assess the feasibility and financial impacts of the reimbursement rate. Right now, the per member per week rate is established, and in other states they look at that weekly. They look at it monthly. They adjust so that we're not getting too far in losses or overages, and that could be addressed somehow through this risk corridor framework, which is really a shared risk approach, which is losses over 1% are reimbursed, or overages over 1% are provided back to the entity. All the things that we deferred to VPTA and DEVA to address, but there is some acknowledgement, and there is an addendum that we'll look at the end of this presentation from AHS and DEVA, talking about their perspective on this report. Want to establish a forum or subcommittees under PTAC to monitor driver programs, work with those AHS companies, our communities, to try to develop more volunteers and community drivers. And then also another subcommittee to coordinate better with HHS, where we have with the Department of Health, with Dale, with DEVA. Are there other reach up or other programs for us to look at to further braid and find more efficiencies? Conduct a study to determine the impact of the behavior policy that is being introduced into our demand response services. It's a top concern.
And are you experiencing it with different populations being served? That's I don't have, you don't need to answer that, but it might be interesting to see if in fact certain populations where you experience a risk greater.
Those suffering from substance use disorder.
And I don't know if there's any, but it raises the question of if you're providing transportation, probably the risk isn't there if somebody's 70 years old going to the doctor's office, but it might be very different for either an illness or to the methadone clinic, for example.
Yeah, that's some serious.
Go ahead, Ross.
What we see is maybe a declining level of civility, and anecdotal from fixed route, from demand response, from our O&D program, and from the NEMT program. That is why another good example is, as we see the policies through DEVA improve the demand response program and abilities to address these, we adopt those under the O&D program so that there's consistency and we're benefiting from that level of consideration.
Do you have anything on that?
I just wanted to affirm from the senator that we have seen these types of behavior issues, particularly from that treatment, going as far as people leaving their transportation in the middle of the route because they're leaving the DOC system. We've had riders who have had welfare checks and had fired gunshots. We've seen quite a wide variety of behavior, which is claim obviously alluded to the Chittenden County issue. So
this is fairly new in terms of the scope and scale of this issue. It's not something that I've been dealing with for 17 years, and just being thankful we're in Vermont, it's so civil, and we don't have these big city issues, and they're coming. And so to work with VPTA and DEVA and to ride on those policy decisions has been helpful across the board. And then
it seems like, I understand you're making recommendations, but it seems like we're making things a lot more elaborate than they need to be. This got set up with about 3 people in the room, thinking about what are those connecting points, and that's something that we should be doing as a matter of practice, and thinking about all the different resources, which are finite, and how they fit together. And I admit it's nice to have an oversight, but so much is dependent on the work that occurs underneath it, very much on a very small scale, as opposed to subcommittees. And that's my only point, is that a lot of things should be done just as a matter of program administration. I guess that's really the point I'm trying to make.
absolutely.
And the more meetings and the more structure, the more the more resources it takes, and I hate to say it can constipate the process, but that's my only observation about how much we create additional structures to kind of do the work that we should be doing routinely.
Right.
You don't even need to respond, that's just only my observation.
Yeah, I would like to respond if I may, and the reason being is because we looked at this as how can we do this effectively? We already do this through PTAC to a degree. What if we just expand that a little bit? And we've never done subcommittees at PTAC. That would be a good opportunity for us to have ongoing discussions rather than quarterly meetings and updates. But you're right. When we looked at these recommendations, we're like, yeah, this is all makes sense, and there's really not a lot of area to disagree on these overall efforts. The last item I'd just like to share with you, our Department of Vermont Health Access was unable to attend today, and I want to share their addendum, which is that they appreciated the work reflected in the report. They agree with the recommendations contained in the report to continue to analyze the impact of regular NEMT rate adjustments and potential Medicaid beneficiary basis change, and the impact of establishing financial risk corridors. You want to state very clearly that the provision of NEMT services need to follow established procurement procedures, and when required, this will include
This whole requirement about a competitive bid relative to the other statement from CMS about the importance of it, they just sort of don't align very well. So you got to go through. On the other hand, you want to make sure that services are provided in a cost-effective way and so forth, and it's just not kind of a money pit, but it's that how that procurement requirement is carried out that creates so much anxiety.
This was a large part of what we discussed with the GAO when they asked about recommendations and that those to bring in those flexibility and ability to better grade these services rather than to try to fit the square peg in the round hole was a topic of that conversation. But that's the overview of the report, and I've really appreciated learning more about the constraints at our partner agency here. For the working relationship we've established, we would like to continue and dig deeper on this braided service model. So that's where we are as of today.
Is there anybody else you think you guys are just going to work through these recommendations? Is there anybody else or decisions that need to be made this year, or people that we need to hear from?
Certainly, it would be benefit to hear from folks from DVHA or AHS, to hear from them directly, their perspective and challenges. It's to move forward in this. I've not done a joint legislative report like this, and once we got going, it was fine. But you can imagine we all have our own responsibilities and perspectives moving into this. So to hear from them would be good. I do plan to proceed as best I can with those recommendations through our program.
But there isn't really a decision point for us.
Not at this time.
No, as long as we have the match and the Medicaid.
As long as you come up with the money.
Yeah. Well, and maintain. We could go back and look at the language we put in every time that puts the conditions under which this contracting would have to meet, and which we generally, if you look at it, can't be met, frankly.
But is it the state procurement guidelines or the federal?
Federal requires it, but how you administer it and how you interpret it, oftentimes you can make things work, or if you don't want to, then you can construct reasons why you can't do it, and you've seen that. So I think, our role is to, and you do it in appropriations all the time, and that is sometimes one program wants to solve its problems by picking the pockets of somewhere else and that will benefit them, but at some point someone's got to take kind of the larger view, and that is, well, what does it look like in terms of the total benefit and the total negative impact, and that's what we've done with this language.
And the 15 million, that number you gave, that's total, or that's our state share?
No, that's total.
That's total.
So almost half of that or more is federal.
Right.
So
It seems like a big problem as far as to increase ridership and gain more dollars is a problem that we can solve in the legislature. It's not in small subcommittees or anything like that. It's probably getting these problems that we're seeing with the drugs and stuff like that under control a little bit better. And I think that's something that legislators do have a way to impact. I think it would go a long ways to help you guys into profitability.
Thank you. We weren't comfortable coming in with a recommendation to establish that language for the scoring of the contracts, but that is been so effective to ensure that the transit system is not negatively harmed through the contracting process. Has allowed us to maintain this contracted service. We think this report provides a little bit more justification to continue this model, but certainly defer to AHS and this body as to any recommendations moving forward.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, nothing else from you, Ross? I think that's it.
That's it.
We didn't have anything else on the agenda, so you get an extra long lunch break to do your other committee work.
I have a meeting every Wednesday at